As you start to tackle harder piano pieces, you will inevitably come across the problem of piano fingering. What fingers do I use? Is this the best fingers to use at this point? It's a huge roadblock to learning and advancing in your piano skills. If you were anything like me, I found myself always doubting if I was using the right fingers or not. In this video, I want to give you some best practice principles for piano fingerings. Through analyzing a very simple piece, I'm going to talk you through some of my thoughts. I want you to try to digest these principles and apply these principles to the pieces you are currently learning. This will be a bit of a technical video. I'm really going to go into the measures and talk about what I'm thinking, so try to follow along. My first tip I'll recommend you is to try to follow all the fingering numbers. So for example, at this starting measure, we have 2, 4, 2, 1, 1. And you can try to have an educated guess when there aren't any finger numbers. So in measure 1, there's 2, 4, 2, but in measure 2, you can see there's no finger numbers. Likely it's just going to be the same one. And this next bit, okay, we have a 5 here at the top, but there are no finger numbers next to the 5. So what do you use there? Generally speaking, when an editor writes a number and there are no numbers after that, you will use whatever finger is naturally already resting on there. So because 5 is on this G here, the next notes F, E, D would just naturally be played by 4, 3, 2 because they're over there. Now the tip here is to try to follow all the finger numbers. I said try because what you'll find is you may look at a finger suggestion and feel, that's not so comfortable for me. In those cases, you might need to just experiment and try to find a finger that works for your hand. One disclaimer that I have to say about piano fingerings is that it's not like a hard science or maths thing where there's a definite correct or wrong answer. Every hand is slightly different, every hand span is slightly different. Some people can extend 1 and 2 bit better, some 2 and 3 a little bit better. So we just have to try to cater it to your specific hand. If you disagree with an editor's finger markings, I suggest you to have a pencil and write down your preferred fingerings. One of the rookie mistakes I often see is people thinking they'll just remember it and they don't write it down. Never ever works. Have a pencil, just write down those fingerings. From my own personal experience, whenever I write certain fingers down, every time I practice and play through that piece, I don't have to kind of think about it. It's just right there as a very obvious visual reminder to myself. My second pro tip for piano fingering today is to learn basic finger patterns for scales, for chords, for arpeggios, which basically are chords but just broken up, and also all their inversions. So for example, in this piece, what do we have here? If you've trained in the G major scale before, you will play this part and go, oh, that's just a G major scale. I've practiced this before. And even if they didn't have the finger numbers, 1 and the 1 and the 2, you will instantly recognize it's best to use 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rather than whatever else, for example. So I'm trying to analyze with you here that learning scales will help you to learn pieces faster because you will know the system of fingerings to use for those parts. Or let's say this part in measure 11. This part. Even if they didn't write 1, 2, 3, 5, I would kind of automatically know to use 1, 2, 3, 5 here, because this is what you would use to play this particular chord. Whether it's a chord or an arpeggios, this particular shape is often played with 1, 2, 3, 5. So whether it's Google searching how to play different scales and chords and arpeggios, or buying a scale book that kind of gives you all the fingerings for all the scales and arpeggios, please go and learn these basic finger patterns of all these things. It'll give you a good basis and foundation for what fingers to use inside your pieces. Tip number 3 I have for you today is to be cleverly lazy. So for example, this first part, we use 2, 4, 2, 1. Now let me use, let's say, a blatantly wrong example to show you my point. So for example, look at this first playing. And now the second one. Which one looks more comfortable? Which one looks easier? In my opinion, this second one is a lot better than, because it allowed me to stay in a position that doesn't require me to turn. So this is a principle I want you to think about when you're thinking about your fingering. How can you be intelligently lazy? So let's say in measures 6, 7, and 8 of the left hand, we're required to play this. feel like a rookie pianist might sometimes show me something like this. Now, as you could see there, compared to if I used 1 here for the D and 5 here for the D, I can go to the G with my 3 very easily. I can play them with legato, which is a bonus, joining everything. And it also allows me to kind of like think less because all my fingers are kind of in a position to play everything rather than needing to kind of jump a few times. So again, the bad one is I want to be instead intelligently lazy, like this. Just kind of one position change and I can kind of play all the notes. Next pro tip is to avoid using the thumb on any black keys if possible. The reason we want to keep the thumb away from the black keys and on the white keys is because it allows for the most neutral position of the hand. So if you just kind of put your hands very naturally on the piano, you can see that the tall fingers are going to be 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 1 are the shorter fingers, right? A composer I respect very much, Frédéric Chopin, lived about 200 years ago. He used to teach B major first to his students, not C major, B major first. If you haven't tried this, I recommend you to learn this scale. The reason he would teach the B major scale first is because it is the most neutral position for the hand compared to all other scales, where short, long, long, short, long, 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 short. It correlates directly with each finger height on the keyboard. Contrary to what most think, he actually thought that C major was one of the hardest scales to learn because C major had all white notes, it was all the same length. However, because your fingers were not the same length, he felt that it was very hard to fit all the fingers to play the same length. Whereas compared to, let's say, something like B major, it actually fits the human hand a lot better. Boom, 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 boom. You don't have to kind of squeeze everything down. Coming back to this piece, every time there was a black note, every time there was an F sharp, if you notice, I was never really using my thumb, always using something like 2. So. I recommend you to learn this if you haven't already. Most of the time, anytime there's an accidental, a sharp, or a flat, we usually don't use our thumb to keep our hands in its most neutral and tensionless position. The last pro tip I have for you today for piano fingerings is that piano fingerings should always serve expression. You want to think about things like where is the peak or climax or where is the ending point. So for example, in measures, let's say 11 and 12, we want to try as much as we can to utilize the hand to try to peak at number 5 if we can here. So this is a very natural thing, and then to, especially if it comes down as well, it's very natural to organize it this way, rather than something else. And this brings us to a point that we just talked about before, was to be cleverly lazy as well. See, one position, no need to turn too much, and we're able to achieve more notes out of this just one position. Be cleverly lazy. So we just discussed how it's sometimes good to use the 5 as the peak of the kind of run of notes. In a similar way, it's also good to use our thumb to end our phrase as well. As you can see this last part, this last 2 measures, and it recommends us to use 5 on this D. Let's say we don't use the 5. Let's see what happens here. So 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2. We would be forced to use a turn here if there wasn't the 5. You know, it's still playable, but if we use this 5 here on the D, it allows us to kind of very naturally use all of our hand to kind of end very nicely on this thumb. I recommend you to try it. So versus ending on the thumb feels more natural. I will link in the description the PDF for this sheet music if you want to learn it. Just to summarize, we've talked about a couple of these pro piano fingering principles that I want you to try to start to digest and apply that to your pieces. We talked about trying to follow the fingering numbers. I see a lot of students not considering it, not taking it seriously. Try to follow them. Consider them. If you don't like them, use a pencil to write the alternative fingerings that you want to use. but you need to have gone through the process of studying them and analyzing them. Number 2, learn basic finger patterns, learn scales, learn chords, learn the fingerings for them. It'll provide a good basis for you to then apply it into real pieces. Number 3, be cleverly lazy. I really love this one. Try to think about positions that you can use to play maximum amount of notes without turning. Number 4, avoid using your thumb on black keys if possible. And number 5, choose fingerings that serve expression. Think about where it's peaking or climaxing. Think about where the end of the phrase is. And pick a fingering that causes the least tension and feels the most natural. Because the more natural your fingerings, the more natural that phrase is going to sound as well. Do you have any other fingering tips? Let me know in the comments. Let me know also in the comments if you have any other piano questions. Catch you in the next piano tutorial.